In this episode, you will learn how to sell your SaaS compliantly to enterprise. This is relevant for developers or founders considering going up market. My name is Aman and I am the head of growth at Nuoptima. I'm excited to be joined by Deepak, co-founder and CEO of BoxyHQ. BoxyHQ is revolutionizing how SaaS businesses integrate enterprise compliance and security features, making it incredibly easy with just a few lines of code. We'll cover Boxy's founding story, the hidden costs of building bespoke security solutions, understanding compliance and security requirements from enterprise buyers, future trends, and how Boxy is marketing with a market-leading PLG motion. But enough of this intro, let's get started. Welcome to this episode of SaaS Minds. I'm joined by Deepak, co-founder and CEO of BoxyHQ. Boxy helps SaaS businesses enable enterprise compliance and security features with a few lines of code. Deepak comes from a technical developer background and was the CTO of Readiness, a cyber startup. Deepak, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Aman. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So, Deepak, let's kick it off. I would love to know who is Boxy, what do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we provide security building blocks specifically for developers. Having come from that kind of background and solve that problem, one of the issues is developers always lack the security mindset or the skill set, but they tend to be thrown tasks that have to plug these into their product. So that's where we kind of come and give them ready to use off the shelf building blocks that get integrated directly into their products, giving them features like enterprise single sign-on, directory sync, audit logging, and very soon a privacy vault that helps them safeguard sensitive data.
Awesome. And can you give us like an idea of the scale that Boxy's at? Like how far are you guys along?
Absolutely. We're still quite early. It's been about 2+ years since we started. And, it's pretty much a category creation here. So it's still very early days, but we're seeing some very interesting traction from the market. Even with the downturn kind of happened, which is quite interesting because, the COVID has kind of accelerated the whole digital transformation phase. And what that has meant is, software eating the world, security still kind of catching up. So, very early days for developer driven security as well, or what we call typically the shift left in security, where security is coming more towards the developers, where it's becoming their responsibility, so to speak, and not just purely the security teams.
Awesome.
So we've been in business for about 2.5 years. We've raised a seed round, so we're venture backed. Our go-to-market strategy has always been open source from day one, which is also quite interesting. There's a few reasons for that, which we can discuss later. But that's in a nutshell. We're about 6 people today. So very small team, very fast moving, very fast paced.
Amazing. And I can't imagine that someone wakes up and goes, I want to, when they're in university goes, I want to build out security features for enterprise as a child. So, I mean, how did you even get into this field? What was that founding story like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you said there is spot on, right? Nobody wakes up to build security features. It kind of just comes along as you're building your core product. And that's exactly what's happened to me, not just once, but multiple times in my career. But most recently, I was a CTO at a cybersecurity scale-up where I spent 7 years there, and we went through this classic journey, finding product market fit with SMBs that are fast-moving, so you can get them to adopt your product very quickly. But then once we started to move up market, we realized that it's a very different ballgame, right? You've got to go through procurement, infosec teams, RFPs, security questionnaires before even your product is used by someone there. So it's a very different mindset that you have to get used to with an enterprise sale. And having done that and seen the headaches there, of course, it's quite multifaceted, right? It's not just the technology there, but how you're able to champion someone there, what kind of problems you're solving there, what is the risk perception of the larger company adopting you. But I realized that we were spending a lot of our engineering time on what I call highly undifferentiated and non-core features, things like authentication, authorization, audit logging, all for the purposes of predominantly compliance. You have to be compliant with what the enterprise wants, but they become key features and you need to maintain it. So that's kind of been my background. And looking at that, I sat down and thought, why isn't there a Stripe-like approach to all of this? And that was kind of the genesis of BoxyHQ with my.
Cool. I mean, and to like clarify like the size of the problem, how painful was it for you to have done this bespoke at the last company? I assume you've done it bespoke several times before. Like, how
Yeah,
painful is that? What does that cost? And how might that set back a startup thinking to go, upmarket?
absolutely. So it just comes down to your time to market there, right? So you figured out you want to move up market. One, of course, you're kind of dabbling with convincing the enterprises that they should adopt you. But at the same time, until you have these, I call them table stakes features now, because what used to be enterprise only features before are now everybody kind of demands that, right? You kind of need to have that from almost day one, I would say. You no longer can kind of wait around. So that's that kind of puts you in a place where you got to first think about what the requirements are around this, how that gets integrated into your product. So there's a lot of development time, then maintenance, and then keeping up to date with all the security vulnerabilities on the back of this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's your classic software development lifecycle. All the costs there in terms of development hours, maintenance hours, testing, and then more importantly, customer support on the back of all this. You run into issues. How do you sort them out? So that's kind of the big ball of wax we're combining together as a product, and you get off the shelf solutions there to plug in and get going. So your go to market of a few weeks, even months, kind of get reduced to a few days.
Amazing. And I'm guessing that as a developer who's been told, okay, you need to go install this security solution, and it's probably the sales guy saying, look, I need you to do this, otherwise I can't sell this, 100K ACV contract. And suddenly all the pressure goes
Exactly.
from, hey, sales team, to like, hey, dev team, why didn't you do this earlier? Like, what is that dynamic like for the developing team, or for the whoever I'm assuming it's the developer that has to deal with this problem internally?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as an early stage company, developers kind of wear multiple hats because you don't really have specialized teams, catering to specific things. You'll have an engineering team, which is also kind of a product team, because you don't typically have specialized product folks unless, let's say the co-founder, one of the founders comes from a product background. And then you got the sales team that's going out and selling your product. So there's obviously that classic conflict between what sales over promises
Yeah.
to what you have to deliver as a development team. So that's kind of where typically this kind of arises, right? The sales team goes to a bigger client. They say, you don't have single sign-on, and they say, oh, we'll build it in 2 months, and then you come back and you talk to the engineering team and they're like, oh, we've got so many other things to do, we can't get this done. So then there's a classic battle of how do you prioritize this? What else do you not do because you need to do single sign-on now? So that becomes the classic problem for the technical team, where they're balancing core features with non-core features like this. And of course, there's always things like things breaking in between, customer support kind of hounding you with things that went wrong. So it becomes a classic delicate balance of when do you do it, when do you kind of put in the resources behind it, then going and figuring out what you need to do around this.
Yeah.
So sales, sales, product, and engineering, right? It's that classic tussle between the three to get this done.
So,
And that's why it's crucial for all three teams there, because sales wants to obviously have this in their tool set to go and sell. A lot of times, if you're in an existing category, everyone else has this, so you just cannot afford to not have it. And if it's a category creation, it also becomes a competitive advantage for you, because if your competitors don't have it yet, then you can go and say, "Hey, I've got an enterprise ready product for you to adopt." So that kind of mitigates a huge amount of risk for the enterprise.
gotcha. So I'm guessing now, like say previously back in when you were the CTO of that scale up, the flow was you go out to sell to enterprise and then you build the compliance features afterwards when you have an inkling of there's a deal coming. Are you suggesting now that you build those compliance features in advance because, let's say, quote unquote, they're cheaper or they're easier to build, and then you can go out and not have that objection anymore?
Exactly. It's a tricky this one, right? It depends on how you encounter it. So for us, it was very much having to learn on the fly. So we went out there, larger companies then said, "Hey, have you spoken to our procurement team?" And then you get this long list of 22, 23 pages of RFPs to fill. And that's when you truly think about compliance, why they're doing it, how do you think about your own security internally. Until then, you kind of focused on making things work, and now your mindset kind of shifts to, okay, I need to think about security a bit more. But then again, how much, right? Because it's a wide spectrum.
Hmm.
So for us, it was a classic, this one of having gone out there, encountered these objections, come back and say, okay, now is it the right time to kind of address these, or should we wait a bit? So it's and back then, there weren't these kind of ready to use tools, so that meant my team had to go out and figure it out, cobble together a bunch of things. You had to understand in detail, how that thing works, which then obviously takes time. Then you're, solving all the various problems there, making sure the integration works. So that is what becomes, time consuming. At the same time, you're blocking everything else in the core product that you could have done in the meantime. So now I think, it's given how competitive things are and how the market just assumes these things, right? You got to have these, otherwise, why are you even talking to us? So they're becoming more and more table stakes. The good thing is you can get in with one of these features. Predominantly enterprise single sign-on, because that's how enterprises access your product. And once you do that, it buys you a lot of time, right? Once you're in there, once you get the deal, and that it takes time for you to onboard them as well. So in the meantime, you have enough time to say, actually, let's now get directory sync or audit logging sorted in the meantime. So that's how we're seeing this now. There's a lot more awareness of this. If you're a second time, third time founder, because you've experienced this, so you're almost thinking about this from day one. For the others, it's the learning process, right? They quickly realize that, okay, I've got to do compliance. And if you think about frameworks like ISO 27001, SOC 2, very important again for enterprise sales, because if you are compliant and have the certification there, that's as good as filling up their RFPs, right? In fact, some of them now say, just send us a report. You don't even have to fill up an RFP.
Cool.
So it's for an enterprise deal. This is it's a no-brainer now to have these compliance features. The compliance certification itself, it takes away a whole bunch of the stress out of the enterprise sales.
Yeah. So like for anyone listening now, I'm sure like they've some maybe they know half the words that you've said and they get what the ISO specifications are, and maybe someone like, oh crap, that's a new word entirely. Like for someone listening right now, could you like rattle off a checklist of like you need to have this and you probably should have this in about 3 months' time, for example?
Yeah. So the ISO 27001 framework, SOC 2, they're what you would broadly classify as information security compliance framework. So what that effectively means is it's less rules, right? It's more a framework where you're saying, this is what I do, and these are all the risks that come with the business. predominantly for a digital company, that's how do you protect your data, right? At the end of the day, you're collecting data from your customer. All the bad folks are after that. So that's what the crown jewels, right? You're trying to protect that at the end of the day. So the framework kind of tries to establish, a baseline for you to say, uh, you know, how do I store this? Where do I store this? How is it being used? How am I protecting it? Then you start to think about, if I was breached, then how do I get things back up and running? Then you start to think about, am I backing up things correctly? If I lose everything today, can I restore everything? How quickly can I restore uh, one, service availability, and two, all the data that I'd collected? So that's broadly, these compliance frameworks. They force you to kind of think about what could go wrong and what are the measures you put in place to kind of mitigate every risk there. So that is, I think, a more long term, goal for a startup, because you're always battling that product market fit with being truly compliant and ready to kind of scale. So those compliance frameworks kind of matter a lot when you start to scale, because you're now not dealing with one or two enterprise customers, but tens, maybe even hundreds of requests coming in. So that's the broader, what I would classify as a security process that you need to think about. But a subset of that is what you would call enterprise readiness, and that's kind of just thinking about what your product needs in order to kind of get into the procurement of a larger company. Their table stakes are today, enterprise single sign-on. That's effectively, you have identity providers like Okta, very well known today, Azure, which is Microsoft's Active Directory solution. And these are places where you maintain like an employee directory. You're a large company, Deepak, CEO, someone else is head of sales. So all of that information is what enterprises want to use to get into a SaaS app, because the IT team then has much better control over saying, okay, should Deepak have access to XYZ app? So enterprise single sign-on kind of gives you that, and that, I think, as a minimum, most startups should have today that are selling or looking to sell into the enterprise. They already have some kind of authentication in place. It's a question of now extending that to say, we support, Okta, Azure Active Directory, and there's about 20 other providers there, well known. So enterprise single sign-on, then you're thinking about, directory sync, much larger companies, making it easy for them to, because people enter, people leave companies. You want to do the same, reflect that into your application. Because leaving access behind for somebody who's left is always a security concern. Then audit logs, because you need to think about anything, all the events that happen within the product. For you can almost think of it as forensics, right? If something were to go wrong, you want to go back and see what did Deepak do in the last 2 weeks that might have caused something, or you might need evidence for the compliance frameworks I mentioned earlier. And you can pull that off audit log saying, okay, access control, only admins have ability to change something. And here's proof that, that's the case. So that's kind of broadly the feature set that you typically think about when you start off. And then over time, things like, the privacy vault becomes interesting, because your data regulations kind of come into picture, data residency, data regulations. GDPR, of course, is the poster child there, kind of leading the way. Every other data regulation kind of follows that quite closely. So you're thinking about, as a much larger company with more responsibility around my data as I'm scaling, what do I have to do to safeguard it? So those are broadly the enterprise readiness features that you would encounter. And this is obviously focused on security, the undifferentiated features, but as a core product, you're also thinking about other things that make it useful for your larger customers. So there are very soft things like having the ability to invite teams and make it easier for teams to use your product. That's very much an enterprise feature, because smaller ones, they don't have many people, right? So you can get away with just a few accounts. So then providing roles within that, authorization, who has access to billing, who has access to everything, who can invite, who can manage the app, but then you probably want somebody else to kind of only see a subset of that. So as you can see, quite a large spectrum, quite a lot of things to think about as you build it, but they all kind of pertain to serving much larger companies.
Yeah, sounds like an endeavor in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, an opportunity, right? Because these are the hard things that get you those deals. Even before you can then showcase the true ability of your core product, and then you're starting to think about how can I be more competitive within the core product itself. So you want to spend as little time on the undifferentiated pieces and as much as time as possible on your core product.
And how do you see this trending in the future? So you mentioned compliance and security interchangeably almost. Do you see, how does that move in the next, let's say, year, and then the next, say, 5 years?
So historically, and even in the future, so compliance is often misunderstood as security. I would say that they're like the two sides of a coin, right? You typically will not think about security unless somebody is kind of making you do it, right? Like everything in business or life. So compliance, that's why compliance frameworks exist, because they're kind of forcing you to think about these things. But having compliance doesn't necessarily mean you're secure, because you could have a very badly built infrastructure product which kind of negates everything, right? Because there's no 100. It's a process, so that's pretty much what you're following, and you're saying you can. I've had it for the last 10 years, but doesn't mean you don't necessarily get breached. So compliance, security kind of go hand in hand. As a growing company, you think about security only because you have to, but then you also quickly realize what, actually this is what I should have been doing, because imagine getting breached, right? Reputational damage. You kind of your brand takes a hit. You've got to convince your existing customers that this is not going to happen again. What have you done to kind of mitigate this? What actually happened to the data that went out? So it starts to get very tricky. And then you have got to deal with reporting this. Now there's fines if you're not taking all the measures to kind of mitigate the attack. Then you're effectively liable for huge fines. So that's kind of where it's trending. Today, it's very easy for someone to kind of attack you. The cost to attack you is quite low, right? Versus the cost to actually safeguard yourself. So there's that huge differential between the cost to attack versus cost to defend. And I think that's only getting worse right now with AI. It's going to get even more, even harder. And you're constantly playing a cat and mouse game, right? Catching up, because as a growing company, you don't necessarily have the right security resources to kind of tackle this. But at the same time, the tooling is improving as well on both sides. So I think the market trend that we are seeing is security is now kind of top of mind, right, for everyone. They know it's crucial. They know as they get popular, they will get attacked. So you kind of want to preempt that. And there's great companies out there that give you all the tooling. For example, Cloudflare. So you want to front your web app with Cloudflare, and you get a whole bunch of network security related features that you possibly cannot build yourself today. So as we're seeing the market kind of mature and adopt these things, we see that there's a lot more tooling for security, and it's very layered, right? So you got to think about infrastructure, you got to think about network, you're thinking about your product itself, you're thinking about the way you build software, where security can play a role in that. Are you actually thinking about attacks as you're building things and not later? So this is what the industry typically calls the shift left. So you kind of build a product and you say now it's the security team's responsibility, but it doesn't quite work. I mean, they of course have to do a bunch of things, but they don't know the product well. So there's a classic balance between how much should the developer be doing versus the security team. So a lot of that is kind of moving back in the sense that in the process. So developers and security teams are now saying, let's think about threat modeling as you're building a feature and not after. So that mindset of I will get breached, so how can I be more secure is kind of maturing quite a bit. As we see, it should be a top of mind, and it's kind of becoming one. Once you've made things work, you're now starting to say, okay, now let me see how to make things secure. So that's how we see the cybersecurity industry, very layered. You cannot have 100% protection, but you make it as hard as possible to kind of get into your systems. And then as a last measure, you assume that people can get into your system, and then you think about internal security. What are the places where you've or what is classically known as privilege escalation, right? You get in somewhere and you realize you now have access to a system which can give you more, like for example giving access to your infrastructure, where bulk of the damage can be done. So that's what companies are truly focused on now: compliance on one side, but bridging that mismatch between compliance and security, and truly thinking is this cybersecurity solution really going to offer me that better security? If so, how? And not just because the market trend says I should have X, Y, and Z. And we truly believe that developers will play a big role in this because they're building the product, they know the ins and outs, and even though they don't necessarily have that the security necessarily the security skill set, but that combined with a security team can do a lot more than just each one working isolated on their own set of tasks.
It's super interesting. I think that whole piece around how to sell into enterprise is like very valuable for any, let's say, early stage founder who's just making their move into upmarket, or someone that's done their first
Yeah.
deals and is like, something's blocking me, and this is the thing that's
Yeah.
blocking them. So that's awesome. I want to pivot the chat a bit now, just to really focus on Boxy as a business.
Yeah.
So, how did you guys first find your 1, 2, 3 customers?
Yeah. So when we started, this was August 21, right in the middle of pandemic. So we've also kind of built the team in a distributed fashion. This was about a year before we started. We kind of started validating. Is this a problem? How big is it? Who would face it? How do we reach these folks? So we had kind of assembled design partners, so to speak. So folks that we knew had this problem, wanted to solve it, because it's always a timing issue, right? You want sometimes a problem is there, but doesn't necessarily need to be solved immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to make sure that there was that alignment in their urgency to solve it, so that we could shape our product, shape the way we kind of built it. So our first kind of 10, 20 customers were on the back of us reaching out to folks, and then or asking within our network to say, can we get introduced to typically CTOs, because we knew and we focused on the enterprise readiness use case, and early seed to Series A stage companies. That was kind of our initial focus, because having come from there, we knew that they'll usually have that problem. unless they're only selling to SMBs, in which case, they can kind of delay it a bit more. So that was how really we, got our first, 10, 20 customers, very much kind of hand selected, to the point that, we also helped them integrate the product because, we were building the API, the developer experience. So we wanted to make sure that that kind of blends in well. And then, as that matured, then, we kind of would get them to do it and figure out, all the friction that they kind of encountered. Then helping their, enterprise customers on board. Then we saw, all the customer support issues that kind of came on the back of that. And then thinking about what we could do within the product to kind of make that more seamless. So that's kind of how we did that initial product building, very much, picking up feedback from customers who were using it live, and it was crucial for them to kind of, get that piece out.
Was there
So
an
that was pretty
external
much,
signal? Was there an external signal that told you like, hey, these guys are now in market to go enterprise ready? Wait, like, did you see like sudden logos appear on their website? Like, what was the sign for you guys externally? Like, oh, this guy's worth reaching out to now.
Yeah, so initially it was just about talking to them, and we almost it was a discovery phase, right? And in the process, by the end of that call, we would know what stage they're at, how far away are they from needing something like this. But like as you said, we slowly started picking up those signals, right? Because the timing is important. A lot of the time, I mean, first they have to hear about us, and then second they have to be in a place where they can actually utilize our product to value. So for us, it was really that picking that stage, right? We knew in that stage, and the other soft signals, right? Like if they might have announced a round. That is typically a signal that they are thinking about the next phase, which typically comes with having to find larger deals, which automatically moves them up market. So the product market fit thing is obviously a wide spectrum, but they have some sense of PMF, and at the same time are thinking about or have started to receive those requests. So for a lot of our prospects that we spoke to, they were receiving these requests from larger companies saying, we like what we see, we heard about you, we want to use you. So that is then a clear indication that they should do this at some point. And then the conversation quickly changed to, when do you want to get this done? And obviously they were very interested in how quickly they can get it done as well. At the same time, we had a lot of prospects come in who said, I've got to sign a pilot, so can we get going? So that's kind of the spectrum we dealt with. And those were the signals, right? That they have some interest from enterprises, or they're preempting it sometimes, or they had some pilots going. So that was kind of our very easy to spot signals, right?
Yeah. And then you mentioned like in that journey, you said you had a concierge service where you helped them install it. Then you, hey, look, here's the API, here's the documentation, go use it yourself. Then it was like, okay, we'll help your enterprise customers use it. You're kind of doing both. You're like this concierge service and this API, like that's almost two different models going on. So how did you navigate that as a team and in the future in your business?
Yeah, so that is very much. I mean, the APIs were almost kind of, you could say, polished on the back of that, right? Because the journey is like today, if you see, we have documentation and people, will try it out even without us knowing, because it's a very it's an open source self-hosted model. But back in the days, the product was getting built, that was changing very quickly. So without the concierge service, it would leave our customers quite confused. Certainly, more not so much about the API changing, more about what is actually happening underneath. So it was a very intentional, almost like like you hear the classic adage, do things that don't scale, because you're kind of understanding the process, you're understanding the friction points, and you can kind of go back as a team and focus on those pieces. So for us, that concierge service was a way for us to say, what are the things we've done badly, so that we can go back and polish that up for the next customer. So that's how we kind of treated this, right? Because for an API driven product, developer experience is crucial, and that developer experience can only come by observing usage of your product. So we're practically sitting with them and saying, that now let's go through it. What is your tech stack? What is your authentication stack? Here's how we can plug it in, and we would give them all the snippets needed to make that happen. Or we would go out and build an example and send a link to the example, and then they would use that to kind of build their integration and come back and say, I've done it up to this point. Now I'm stuck. I don't understand what's going on. And then we would kind of go back and look at and then it helped us think about the content. You'll see a lot of our blogs. It's for us, a lot of the sort of let's say the marketing, the go-to-market strategy has always been about content. How do we give them useful content? Less about BoxyHQ, right? More about the problem they're solving. For example, if you think about the SAML protocol in enterprise single sign-on, quite a complex one. It's based on XML from about 18, 20 years ago. A lot of the modern developers have never seen that necessarily, or have dealt with that in detail. So then kind of breaking down that flow for them and helping them understand that without going too much into detail, because they don't need to know a lot of those details. So that kind of helped us figure out what kind of flow diagrams would make it easier. How do we explain the flow? Sometimes we would actually get on a call with them and show them the flow, and they would be like, oh yeah, now I get it. Then they would just go back and made it a whole lot easier for them to kind of sometimes visually show things that would otherwise have been hard for them to grasp. So that was kind of the whole, because you're doing a lot of things, right? You're building it, you're documenting it, you're thinking about content to be discovered effectively, and then the onboarding journey itself. Once they come in, do they have enough steps to kind of progress at least to the next stage, not necessarily to the end. And at the same time, we started building our community around it, because that's the place where folks come and talk to us, especially when they have a problem. Sometimes they'll come and tell us that we've integrated everything and we're a great product, which is of course a great sign of that that developer experience that I just mentioned. So that was kind of our whole process there. Very much seeding product, community, and making sure the problem was being solved as the market saw it, and not so much from our own perspective.
Yeah, cool. And then so going into 2024, is content a big still part of your marketing plan, or what's your marketing strategy now in 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've just launched our SaaS product that until now everything was self-hosted. We didn't really have a hosted solution. That's kind of now a month ago we kind of soft launched that. And what that has now meant is, so until now marketing was purely organic, right? We had to go out there and talk about ourselves, be useful. We would tap into conversations that were talking about single sign-on and just trying to suggest, hey, here's an open source project. Would love to get your feedback, or help you solve this single sign-on problem. And the classic content, not so much. It is very SEO driven, right? So far, very organic. We haven't really spent a lot on paid marketing, mainly because we had no funnel to capture folks. So now with the SaaS product, we have a place where people can sign up, and that kind of gives us a moving ahead. That's one of the pillars for us, right? Just experimenting with paid marketing, the keywords out there. We're organically coming up on Google, but we want to make sure that we're there for the right keywords, the right set of the right intent there. But content is still a very big strategy. We see that working well. All the enterprise customers, coming to us have discovered us on the back of either content or the examples we have out there. So that kind of we'll continue to develop on that. That's a mixture of for us, content is also about free tooling around this. So, for example, we have a service that mimics, what Okta and the other identity provider
Nice.
does. That's very useful for testing, so that people sometimes discover us from there, and then realize, oh, we've got a full single sign-on, proxy solution on the other side. So that continues to be, a big, key marketing effort for us. We hired a customer success engineer who's kind of like the developer relations person as well. It's again a wide spectrum. It's a very confusing role, but we now have a good sense of what this person should be doing. Predominantly helping our prospects, and at the same time bringing back those lessons to say we can write about this, or we can integrate with this framework because that's widely used out there. So that's kind of a big the community driven marketing as well, right? For us, being open source. So those are kind of largely the two sort of marketing efforts from our side. One is community organic, based on content, free tools. The other one is kind of more classic enterprise sales, where my co-founder and I are kind of going outbound campaigns. We have a good sense of who could use us, the larger companies, of course. So in many ways, our own enterprise readiness journey, right? It's a vicious circle, but we have all the tooling for it. But
You'd hope so.
exactly. But it's the other side of it, right? Like, how do we find them? Are they at the right time? What are the kind of collateral? The collateral is very different for decision makers versus the developers who discover us. We already have good content for the developers, but what are the decision makers looking at? Head of sales, as we spoke, they're looking for this. Head of product, sometimes security. So those are the three kind of important stakeholders for us, who ultimately might have the power to make that decision.
Yeah, from a marketing perspective, I think you nailed it on the head with because it's all about timing with your business, with your product, specifically for developers. It makes developer marketing semi straightforward, where it's like you just need to appear at the right place at the right time, which kind of lends itself to, hey, you need to be ranking high organically, or you need to be ranking and paying for that position, or you need to be on Reddit forums educating people on the how-to guides or the tutorials, so they can learn that step before they need you. And then it's like, oh, Boxy is the perfect solution because it just did everything that looked so painful to do, but in a couple steps.
Yeah, exactly. It's what I call it's a classic marketing funnel, right? I mean, of course, now people say it should be a flywheel, but ultimately it's your what is popularly known as tofu, mofu, bofu. Top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. You want to be top of funnel awareness, right? Somebody needs to know about us so that the next time they're thinking about it, we pop back in. Around this, we also, obviously get into where our competitors are. We have a few competitors who are ahead of us, and we kind of utilize that because we cannot compete with them at on a paid marketing level. We don't have that kind of fundraise yet, but that allows us to be kind of quite smart and frugal about it, right? We're making noise where they are, so that when folks look at them, they're also looking at us, and we kind of are at top of mind in where, because there's always that selection process. So we want to make sure,
especially with
we're at least in the mindset of the selection process.
Yeah,
exactly.
They're always trying to decide who's the cheap one, who's the expensive one, what's going to cost me more in maintenance time. I think is the main thing they're thinking about as well.
Exactly. Having been a developer myself, I never liked talking to salespeople, right? So that's why our open source model that way has that benefit as well, because they don't even need to speak to us. They come in, they run the app on their laptop. They can try it out. They figure out whether it's useful or not. And then, the process starts after that, right? Saying, either they will contact us for more detail or send someone in to say, what are your pricing plans? What do you offer? So what are the deployment models? So that kind of starts off that conversation for us. And by then they've already tried us in some form, right? So That's kind of the big advantage we see with the open source model. And that's, I think, the right way to sell to developers. Well, not to sell to developers, the kind of
To
making
market
their own
developers. Yeah.
performance.
So, given that you've been a developer yourself, and you've had a really interesting career path from, let's say, dev to CTO, now to CEO, which I think that last bit's
Yeah,
the quite an interesting one. I mean, like, I'm sure there's developers listening to this who are probably have this itch to do that journey potentially. Any
yeah.
top tips for them?
Yeah, so I mean, being CEO is not all glamorous, right? I think most folks know that anyway, because I don't get to do the cool things anymore. Although still driving the product, still kind of trying to code when I can. But I think as CEO, your mindset kind of changes quite drastically, right? You're thinking about you're balancing that whole long term vision. You've got that vision, but you cannot see that vision through so quickly, right? And especially in a category creation, it takes that patience to kind of make that happen. But then you also have to think about short term and mid term. What do you need to focus on? So your mindset quickly changes from doing things to making sure everybody's doing or at least the right set of things that is moving you in the right direction, right? So you're setting that direction more than actually kind of executing or implementing it. So it's really about rallying the team around that common mission. You're defining your values and what kind of drives you. Because if you're solving a very hard problem, it's difficult, right? It says you have more hard days than good ones.
Yeah,
So kind of trying to be stable around it is key. So as a developer, what you do is very different from having to do that at any kind of founder level, right? Because you're dabbling with so many other things like admin and accounting and all of those things come in as well, which uh, is definitely not something you're used to. So um, I think it's just about that, right? Knowing that there's going to be a mindset shift, a change in role, and being absolutely open about that, right? Because otherwise, you get into this problem of, then maybe you're better off as a CTO and not a CEO, because then you can entirely focus on the technical aspects. So that, I think, is the biggest mind shift, the change there. As CEO, you're effectively looking at everything else, right? I mean, which at a startup is just product and distribution, but distribution is very different to building a product. So I think that's the biggest mindset shift there, right? Being able to sell, and not in the sense of having to be a good salesperson, but understanding the problem, understanding how to find the right set of people who are looking to solve that problem. Be always being in that discovery phase where you're saying, okay, I have this thing in mind, but maybe it's not the right thing, or maybe it needs to be approached in a different way. So that's, I think, the biggest mindset shift for me that happened as a CEO.
amazing.
And then you're also thinking about fundraise and keeping enough money in the bank and making sure you're planning everything correctly for the next round. What are the milestones to get there? How do the VCs think on the other side about the opportunity? So the storytelling as well, right? That kind of has to come in over time. And as developers, you're not natural at it, but you learn over time. So
Yeah.
it's just that, I think you got to be open to learning and doing boring things more so than.
Nice. And then I'm mindful not to like alienate half people listening to this. Like, so for the SaaS founders listening to this who have been thinking about security, like, what's the top tip that you'd give to them?
Yeah, so I mean, this is what I would always say, right? Like, obviously, there's the utopian things that you need to do, but as founders, we all know that we've got to approach it one at a time, right? So, from a security perspective, think about when you need to start doing this, and kind of, as I say, do it only when necessary, right, in the beginning, because you're battling with also figuring out what works, so you don't want to mix up and spend too much time on security. It's a catch 22, right? You have to do it early, but not so early that it blocks everything else, because ultimately security does take up time and resources. So it's just that balancing that out, right? the enterprise opportunity is there, that's a good time to start thinking about security. In many ways, the initial stepping stone to security is a larger customer, right? That's kind of and they have enough standard guidelines to kind of get you there for the next 10 customers. So it's just again timing, right? You want to plan it. You probably want to have it on top of your mind, but do it exactly when you're ready to go,
Awesome.
rather than saying I'll add everything in now. But make sure your product is there. Got your core differentiator in there, and then you can think about this.
Nice.
Unless, of course, you're selling to enterprise from day one, then it's a no-brainer, right? You gotta plug this in from day one.
Sweet.
And it's
Awesome.
not as hard as it looks, so it's just tedious. So
Yeah. Cool. So I think we're at the last bit of the section, which is the quick fire question. So I'll ask you 4 questions, and you can give me 4 insightful answers. So
awesome.
question number 1 is, what's the best book that you've read recently?
Recently was Predatory Thinking by Dave Trott. Um, Really interesting book. Very short stories about his, he worked at Ogilvy Advertising. So he has great stories about, it pertains to marketing specifically, but, doesn't necessarily box you into that. It's a very interesting way to think about, marketing, competition, in general. How do you outthink someone who has way more resources than you?
Cool. Which entrepreneur or business leader do you admire the most?
For me, it's always been Bill Gates, and that kind of continues to be so.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Um, I mean, it's for me, it's always been about. I mean, there's a lot of advice out there, right? But one that said, listen to advice, but also think about context before before you take
Mm,
it. Before you take it fully, right? So that was quite interesting because it just means that it may not apply to you, may apply to you in a different way. So just kind of setting the context around it is important, which is strangely a meta thing, right? It's an advice about an advice.
yeah. I think that's a great piece of advice. It's a very wise one, because once you start receiving so much advice, you
So
start seeing that everything's contradictory, and it's all
yeah,
dependent
exactly,
on what happened to that person or their journey.
correct, yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deepak, for your time. Really appreciate it, and I look
Absolutely.
forward to seeing how Boxy grows in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for sticking around. If you want to see the show notes, please go to nuoptima.com/SaaS podcast. Otherwise, see you at the next episode. Bye.